Hey, what's going on? This is Robert Syvret of Syvret Music, and we are back in part 3 of the drum programming tutorial basics series. Where we last left off, I finished the little intro fill, the instrumental intro portion, and the verse. So what we are going on to now is the chorus. But as I stated before, I was going to explain a little bit, not totally in depth, but of Beat Detective. So Beat Detective is a really cool feature in Pro Tools, and I believe Logic has something similar to it, and maybe some other DAWs have a similar feature. But what it basically does is, if I selected something with good transients, say the bass track, you'll see these purple lines show up. And what it's doing is it's registering different transients within the audio file, and it's putting a marker there. And so what I first do is I go to Operation Audio and I select the bar and beat marker generation, and then I go to Selection, and it does a relative start and end beat, but I know that I play 16th notes in this song on the bass, so then I'll click Capture Selection, and you'll see that it changed the start bar and beat and the end bar and beat, and then the time signature 4/4. If your song's in 6/8 or 7/4 or a different one, you'll want to change that beforehand, but I believe it will read that based on how your session template is set up. And then from the capture selection section, I go to detection and I keep it on normal and I keep enhanced resolution. High emphasis means that it will attract even lower transients, but I just do enhanced resolution. Low emphasis does the exact opposite. It only takes in the very noticeable transients. And I will analyze this. So it will load. And then I'll go to subbeats. And I'll drag it out and I'll drag it back in. And as you're dragging out the sensitivity, you'll notice that there's less markers within the audio clips. And I keep it at 100 because when I go to generate, what it does is, if you look up here on the tempo line, select preserve sample position, because you don't want to move the samples at all based on what's going to happen after I click OK. Now you'll see there's a bunch of set tempo markers. You can see they're pretty crazy looking. And what it did is it followed the exact tempo and set up basically a grid on that. And the reason why I do this is because when you have just a simple grid that follows that one tempo, it can sound robotic, but imagine if you're a drummer playing along with somebody, like the bassist, for example, and you might not be recording to a click, you're following what they're doing, and they might not be perfectly on all the time. Or if they did record to a click and you're playing to just the bass track that was recorded to a click, you're going to be following them more so than you will be the click. So in this instance, it gives a better sense of realism. And then without it, you can hear how it's a little bit more rushed. So it's not a huge difference, but in some ways it can make or break the drum programming. And sometimes it comes out really great, and then other times it will might be a little bit too off because your playing wasn't exactly on the click, or it was just a little shaky and rushed. So that's Beat Detective. And I'll go into further detail in a later part. But for now, let's focus on the chorus. So for the chorus, this is what we got. So we got a lot going on here. We've got this extra snare hit. We've got some ride bell being hit. And then we've got this little crazy part here. So first, what I'm going to do is start it off like I had before. Let me first section off this part. I have the interlude as this portion. So it's a little bit different from the chorus bit. And so just seeing the separation lines helps me out with just keeping, in check with which parts I'm at and which parts I'm editing. And so what I'll do is I'll just take this and I'll bring it down like I've done before. I'll select all my crashes and I'll bring them up to 120 velocity. All right. And so with the ride bell, unlike the crash or the ride in itself, I will edit it like I would a hi-hat or a tom, and I will randomize each one, and also on the snare hits, I will select each one where there's a snare hit, and I will just bring down the velocity for that. So in this instance, since there is a repeating portion, I'm actually just going to, for time's sake, just focus on the first half because it's repeated. So I brought those down, and now what I'll do is I'll bring down extras. Remember, after the crash hits, you'll want to bring down the first hit on the ride or the hi-hat or tom, so you keep that realism of the drummer not moving at lightning speeds to get back and have a high velocity hit. And what I'll do is I'll just go through and I'll bring these down. Sometimes I'll skip a few, and some of them I'll go down pretty drastically. For this sampler program, it acts weird with the ride, and if you bring it down too much, it starts to dip as if you were doing some crazy kind of compression, and then I find it to be a little bit distasteful, so I will just bring them down ever so slightly. Ride's not one of those kind of parts on the drum that you hear too much, especially if it's ringing out, and so just a little edit here and there really helps out. But unless you're mixing the ride separately within the mixer window of the plugin, which I'll get to in another part, and you're mixing that portion loud, then you will want to focus more on this. But I just did a short, or a quick, I should say, edit on the velocities. So this part, I will bring down this ride even more. Actually, I will keep this one there because I notice I have a bell hit there. So I'll want to bring down this more and this one a little bit more. Cool. Now for the bell hits, I like to keep them accented, so I'll keep them a little bit higher just so that you hear them because it's a pretty interesting part. This one, there's a crash right after, so I might just bring it down a little bit more. Now I'm going to bring down this one a little bit more too. All right, cool. So now we're going to move on to the snare. So whenever you do have a drum part that's like this, where the snare does that extra hit on the 16th note offbeat, what I do is I select all of them, and I will just bring them down. If you bring them down too much, like right around here, it might start sounding like a ghost note. In this instance, I like having like a more energetic drummer, more power, so I'll keep it a little bit higher. Still a little bit too low for me. That should be good. And then I'll just go through and I'll bring down these snare hits a little bit more. One thing I should say is that when you play out your drums by hand, it helps you with less tedious editing on the different parts because you will have a different velocity attack with your fingers rather than having a preset note like this where each one is the same. So it makes it kind of easier when it comes to editing. You don't really have to do that much to it velocity-wise. For this, because there's little fill, I'm going to bring this down to here, which has a different snare sample. And maybe I'll just bring this one down to here just for fun. I don't know if it's going to really change much. So here there's a deeper snare attack there, so I'm going to actually bring that up and actually bring this one down. I also forgot this ride cymbal hit, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit as well. I'm going to bring up this snare hit right here to see if I can get more of a pop. So that sounds cool right there. So now we've got the snare and the ride. The kick drum is doubled. So what I'll do is for every one of these doubles, I will take down the velocity so that it doesn't sound like the drummer is going crazy with the kick. And now for the kick drum, especially because samples can be weird with the kick, I will randomize by bringing the soft ones up and these ones down ever so slightly and randomly. I don't really know if there's a correct or a better set velocity for certain drum parts, but I kind of just eyeball it. Mostly because when it comes to the mix, a lot of what's important with the drum programming sounds is how you mix it to make it sound like it's a real drum kit, not just performance-wise. If you want to listen to a very good album that has very great drum programming, listen to Animals as Leaders' first album, which I believe is all programmed drums. And that was Misha Mansour, I believe, who programmed the drums for that album. So you notice here there's like a quick little fill with the kick drum. So now we'll listen to this. I'll get rid of this ride hit that is on the crash. What I'll do too is I'll take this snare hit and I'll bring it down to this popping snare sound. Bring it down a little bit more. Bring that down a little bit more too. Alright, cool. And now I notice I have more kicks here, but I'm just going to keep it the same time purposes, and I will copy this over. And now we have a full chorus, and we can actually listen to this. apologize for not doing this in the other parts with the full track. Sorry about that. Let me do this again. So I actually don't like that snare hit being so loud on this part. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring these guys back up. Maybe I'll just bring these down a little bit more, just because he's doing something kind of busy there. Alright, so we got the chorus down, and as you can see, the drums are starting to become more, let's say, dynamic. For old time's sake, I'm going to actually just bring these all down a little bit just to match the previous part, so when it comes to mixing, there's nothing that really jumps out too crazy, you know? Alright, and that concludes this part of the drum programming tutorial. Thanks for watching, and be on the lookout for the next video.